I found the plan on a Tuesday, not a metaphorical plan. An actual written numbered step-by-step plan, organized into phases with timelines and milestones, saved in a chat thread between my husband and his mother that I opened on his iPad while looking for a recipe he'd bookmarked. The iPad was on the kitchen counter. The screen was unlocked. The app was open to their conversation, not hidden, not encrypted, not buried under layers of security, because my mother-in-law, Constance Aldridge, was 64 years old and believed that technology was a tool for communication rather than concealment. And it had never occurred to her that her daughter-in-law might pick up the wrong device at the wrong moment and see everything. The plan was actually titled as though it were a business proposal or a project charter. Transition strategy, Brooke. Brooke is my name. I am the subject of the transition strategy. And as I stood in my kitchen, holding my husband's iPad with pasta water boiling on the stove, and my 3-year-old daughter, Lily, drawing at the table behind me, I read a document that explained in my mother-in-law's precise and comprehensive language exactly how my husband was going to separate me from my home, my savings, my daughter, and my life. Not through confrontation, not through divorce, but through a systematic phased campaign designed to make me believe that every loss was my own fault. The plan had 14 steps. I read them all. The pasta boiled over. Lily asked me why the water was angry, and I stood in the kitchen of a house I'd helped pay for in a marriage I'd helped build, holding a device that contained the blueprint for my demolition. And I understood with a clarity so total it felt like a physical event, like a flash of light that illuminates everything and leaves you temporarily blind. That the two people I trusted most in the world had been working together methodically and patiently for what the chat timestamps revealed to be just over 5 months to take everything I had. But I need to go back. Before the iPad, before the kitchen, before the Tuesday that cut my life into before and after. My name is Brooke Aldridge Nay Brennan. I'm 33 years old. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, a quiet, bookish kid with a single mother who worked as an office manager at an insurance company and who raised me with the fierce, practical love of a woman operating without a safety net. My mother, Janet Brennan, didn't have family money or a partner or the luxury of making mistakes, so she didn't make mistakes. She budgeted, she planned, she showed up. She taught me by example rather than lecture that a woman's security depends on her own competence and that the most dangerous thing a woman can do is trust someone else to be her foundation. I listened to her partly. I went to college on scholarships and part-time work, graduated with a degree in accounting, and built a career at a mid-sized firm in Richmond that valued precision and rewarded reliability. Two qualities I had in abundance. By 26, I was a senior associate earning $72,000 a year with a savings account, a retirement fund, and the specific grounded confidence of a woman who has followed her mother's advice and built her own floor. Then I met Patrick Aldridge, and the floor shifted. Patrick was 30 when I met him, a sales director at a tech company. Handsome in the effortless, unremarkable way of men who have never had to try very hard at anything. He had an easy smile, a talent for making people comfortable, and the particular social fluency that comes from growing up in a family where confidence was not earned but inherited. Patrick was not self-made. Patrick was Constance's maid, shaped, polished, and directed by a mother who had spent 3 decades treating her only son as both her greatest project and her primary investment. Constance Aldridge. I need to describe her carefully because she is the architect of the plan. And architects are defined not by what they build, but by how they think. Constance was 64, widowed for 9 years. Her husband, Gerald, an executive at a pharmaceutical company, had died of a stroke at 57, and she occupied the center of the Aldridge family with the absolute gravitational authority of a woman who had been the primary decision maker in every room she'd entered since 1987. She was not loud, she was not dramatic, she was something more effective, she was thorough. Constance thought in systems. She analyzed relationships the way engineers analyze load-bearing structures, identifying stress points, calculating tolerances, designing reinforcements. She did not lose her temper. She did not make threats, she made plans. And her plans had the quiet, comprehensive, terrifying quality of documents prepared by someone who has thought of everything, including the possibility that someone might think of something she hadn't thought of, and who has prepared a contingency for that too. I met Constance 1 month after Patrick and I started dating. Dinner at her home, a 4-bedroom colonial in Henrio County that she and Gerald had purchased in 1998, and that Constance had maintained after Gerald's death with the meticulous attention of a woman preserving not a house, but a monument. The dining room was set for three. The silver was real. The food was catered. Constance did not cook, not because she couldn't, but because she considered cooking a task beneath the scope of her attention, the way a general considers cleaning rifles beneath the scope of command. She assessed me not rudely. Constance was never rude, the way a scalpel is never rude, precisely. She asked about my work, accounting, a nod of approval that I would later understand was approval of my utility, not my profession. She asked about my family, single mother, no father in the picture. A slight tightening around her mouth that I registered as sympathy and would later recognize as classification. She asked about my plans, career growth, eventually a family, another nod, another classification. Another data point entered into whatever internal system Constance used to evaluate the people in her son's life. At the end of the evening, she walked me to the door, took both my hands, and said, "You're exactly what Patrick needs." I was flattered. I was 27, and a woman in a four-bedroom colonial with real silver had just told me I was exactly right. I didn't hear what she actually said, which was not a compliment, but a specification. Not "you're wonderful," or "I'm happy for you." You're exactly what Patrick needs. The emphasis was on Patrick's needs. I was the solution to a problem Constance had identified in her son. His lack of financial discipline, his tendency toward drift, his need for a partner who would provide the structure and stability that Constance had been providing for 30 years and was ready to delegate. I was not being welcomed, I was being hired. Patrick and I married after 2 years of dating. The wedding was at Constance's church, organized by Constance's planner, attended by Constance's guest list. My mother came, Janet Brennan, in a dress she'd bought herself and shoes. She'd broken in over 3 weeks so they wouldn't hurt her feet. And she sat in the front row on my side and looked at Constance across the aisle and said nothing. But afterward, at the reception, while Patrick was dancing with his mother and the band was playing something tasteful, my mother pulled me aside and said one sentence. "Watch her, Brooke. She's not letting go. She's extending." I didn't listen. The second time, I didn't listen to my mother. The marriage was good for 2 years. Or it appeared good. The way a building appears solid when the structural issues are hidden behind drywall. Patrick and I bought a house, a three-bedroom in the suburbs, financed with my savings for the down payment, $42,000, and a mortgage we both signed. Patrick's income was higher. He earned $110,000 to my 75, but his spending was higher too, because Patrick had inherited Constance's taste without inheriting her discipline. And the difference between earning well and managing well is the difference between having money and keeping it. I managed the finances naturally, inevitably, because I was an accountant and Patrick was not. And because the role of financial manager had been pre-assigned by Constance's assessment, Brooke is the structure, Brooke is the stability. Brooke is the person who ensures that Patrick's life functions while Patrick does the things Patrick enjoys, which includes sales events, golf, client dinners, and the general performance of a man whose primary skill is being likable and whose primary limitation is that likability is the only skill he's ever needed. Constance was present, always present, like, not intrusively, not with the obvious boundary crossing interference that would have given me grounds to object. Present the way weather is present, constantly pervasively, shaping the environment without being identified as the source. She called Patrick every morning at 7:30, a 5-minute call, mother to son, that I could hear through the bedroom wall and that covered his schedule, his plans, his mood. She called again in the evening. After dinner, when the plates were cleared, when the day was winding down, and Patrick's resistance to influence was at its lowest, she visited every Sunday. Lunch, 2 hours. The precise duration required to assess the household and issue adjustments without triggering the alarm system of a daughter-in-law trained in pattern recognition. The adjustments were subtle. A comment about the curtains. Have you considered something lighter? The room feels dark. A suggestion about the garden. Gerald always said a house without a garden is a house without a soul. A recommendation for a financial advisor. My friend Marcus manages portfolios for young families. You should call him. Each adjustment was individually reasonable, collectively directional, and cumulatively transformative. Over 2 years, the house began to look like Constance's house. The garden began to resemble Constance's garden. The financial advisor, Marcus Hale, who I eventually called because the suggestion was repeated 7 times over 4 months, turned out to be not just Constance's friend, but Constance's personal advisor, a man who reported to Constance about our finances with the casual regularity of a staff member updating a supervisor. I discovered this by accident. A misrouted email Marcus to Constance containing a summary of our investment portfolio and a note that said, attach as requested, the allocation looks healthy. Patrick's spending is up, might want to discuss with him. Attached as requested, Constance had requested a report on our finances. Marcus had provided it. Our private financial information, savings, investments, spending patterns, mortgage balance had been flowing to my mother-in-law through a channel I didn't know existed, operated by a man I'd been told was an independent advisor. I confronted Patrick calmly, specifically with the controlled precision of an accountant presenting findings. Your mother is receiving reports on our finances from Marcus. What? Marcus Hale, the financial advisor your mother recommended. He's sending her summaries of our accounts, our savings, our investments, our spending. She requested them. Patrick's response was the response I would come to recognize as his default when confronted with evidence of his mother's involvement, deflection, minimization, and the specific practiced redirect that turns the discoverer into the problem. You're reading into it. Marcus is a family friend. Mom probably just asked how we were doing financially. She worries. Sh- She doesn't worry. She monitors. There's a difference. And Marcus isn't a family friend. He's her advisor, and he's been reporting our private financial information to her without our consent. Brooke, you're overreacting. This is just mom being mom. Mom being mom. The phrase that excused everything. The universal solvent that dissolved every concern, every boundary, every piece of evidence into the harmless, inevitable, unremarkable category of maternal behavior. Mom being mom as though mom were a natural force like gravity, like weather that could not be questioned, could not be challenged, could only be accepted. I fired Marcus. This was my first act of resistance, and it was received by Constance with the calm, measured response of a strategist whose initial approach has been countered and who is now recalibrating. I hear you let Marcus go, she said at the next Sunday lunch. Not to me, to Patrick in front of me with the specific configuration of eye contact that made me the subject of a conversation I was excluded from, even though I was sitting at the table. Brooke thought we should find our own advisor. Patrick said that's sensible, Constance said. The word sensible was delivered with a particular inflection that meant noted, not agreed with noted, filed, incorporated into the next iteration of the plan. I didn't know there was a plan, not yet. That discovery was 2 years away, sitting in a kitchen with boiling pasta and a 3-year-old drawing at the table. But I felt something. The same unease that my predecessor stories describe. The unease that exists below the threshold of language and above the threshold of denial. The feeling of being managed. The sense that the life I was living was not entirely mine. That it was being shaped gently but continuously by a force I could identify, but couldn't prove and couldn't resist without being told I was overreacting. Lily was born when I was 30. The pregnancies was wanted, planned, joyful, the one part of my life that felt entirely mine, that existed outside the reach of Constance's system. When Lily arrived, 7 pound 4 O's, dark hair, her father's mouth, my mother's eyes, I held her and felt the specific, overwhelming, almost violent love that motherhood produces. The love that is not gentle or reasonable, but ferocious, possessive. The love that says, this is mine, and I will destroy anything that threatens it. Constance arrived at the hospital 4 hours after the birth. She held Lily, she smiled, a real smile, the first genuinely unguarded expression I'd ever seen on her face. And she said, she looks like Patrick. Not, she looks like you. Not, she looks like both of you. She looks like Patrick. The classification again, the assignment of ownership. Lily belonged to the Aldridge line, and the Aldridge line belonged to Constance. The next 2 years were the years of escalation. Lily's arrival changed the dynamics, not because Constance loved Lily less than expected. She loved her intensely with the focused, proprietary intensity she brought to everything she valued, but because Lily's existence raised the stakes. Before Lily, the worst-case scenario for Constance was Patrick's marriage failing, and Patrick returning to her orbit diminished but recoverable. After Lily, the worst-case scenario was different. Patrick's marriage failing, and Lily, Constance's granddaughter, the next generation of the Aldridge line, the continuation of Gerald's legacy, being raised by Brooke, being shaped by Brooke, becoming Brooke. This was for Constance unacceptable. Not because Brooke was a bad mother, I was a good mother, attentive and patient and present. And even Constance never disputed this. Because Brooke was independent. Because Brooke had fired Marcus. Because Brooke had a career and a mother and a set of values that existed outside the Aldridge system. Because Brooke might at any point decide that the system was not serving her and leave and take Lily with her. Constance needed to prevent this. And Constance, being Constance, did not panic or improvise or react emotionally. She made a plan. The plan I found on the iPad. Tuesday, 5:47 p.m., pasta water boiling, Lily drawing a purple horse. She would later tell me. A horse that lived in the clouds and ate stars. I picked up the iPad to find the recipe Patrick had bookmarked, a carbonara he'd been talking about making. One of his periodic enthusiasms that lasted exactly one attempt. And the screen opened not to a browser, but to a messaging app. And the conversation on the screen was between Patrick and Mom. And the first message visible was Phase 3 is going well. She's isolated from Janet now. The argument about the holidays worked perfectly. Haven't spoken in almost 3 weeks. Move to Phase 4 next month. Financial restructuring, remember? Slow, gradual. She's an accountant. She'll notice anything sudden. I didn't breathe. I don't mean that metaphorically. My diaphragm stopped contracting. My lungs stopped expanding. My body diverted all resources to my eyes and my brain and the screen in front of me because the body understands, before the mind does, that what is being read is a survival level event. I scrolled up, not quickly, carefully, methodically, with the muscle memory of a woman who has spent 11 years reading financial documents and knows that the most important information is in the details. And the details require patience. The chat history went back 5 months, 5 months of messages, not daily, not obsessive, but regular, 2 to 3 times a week. The cadence of a project with a timeline and a manager. And the manager was Constance. The plan, the transition strategy, Brooke was a document Constance had typed and sent as a message 4.5 months earlier. It was long, it was detailed. It was organized into phases, each with objectives, tactics, and success metrics. And reading it standing in my kitchen, holding an iPad, while my daughter drew purple horses at the table behind me, was this most disorienting experience of my life. Because the document was not the raving of a mad woman or the impulsive scheme of a vindictive mother-in-law. It was rational, it was structured, it was written in the calm, analytical language of a person who has thought carefully about every step and anticipated every variable. And the clinical precision of it was more frightening than any amount of rage or malice, because rage and malice are hot and visible and can be confronted. This was cold. This was architecture. This was a building designed to collapse on top of me. Phase 1, isolation from external support. Duration, 2 months. Objective, reduce Brooke's access to independent advice and emotional support. Tactics, create friction between Brooke and Janet, her mother, by amplifying existing tensions around holiday scheduling and parenting styles. Patrick, to casually mention that Janet said something about your parenting that bothered me. Plant the seed. Let Brooke's insecurity do the rest. B. Encourage Brooke to reduce her work hours to spend more time with Lily. Frame as family values. Gradually reduce her professional network and income. C. Distance Brooke from her friend group by filling the social calendar with Aldridge family events that conflict with Brooke's existing commitments. I read this and thought the holiday argument. 3 weeks ago, Patrick had told me that my mother had made a comment about how I was too strict with Lily's bedtime routine. I'd been hurt. I'd called my mother. My mother had denied saying it. I'd been confused, then angry. Not at Patrick, at my mother, because Patrick had delivered the information with such casual, reluctant specificity. I didn't want to tell you, but I thought you should know that it sounded true. And the truth was, it was fabricated. Phase 1 Tactic A, plant the seed. Let Brooke's insecurity do the rest. My work hours. 6 weeks ago, Patrick had suggested warmly and supportively that I reduce my schedule to 4 days a week. You're stressed, he'd said. Lily needs you. We can afford it. I'd agreed reluctantly because my career mattered to me, but persuaded by the logic that seemed collaborative and caring. Phase 1 Tactic B. Reduce her professional network and income, the social calendar. I thought about the last 3 months, the Sunday lunches with Constance, the Saturday family events, the Friday dinners with Patrick's colleagues that somehow always conflicted with my friend Maya's monthly gathering, or my book club, or the coffee dates I'd been slowly, imperceptibly canceling. Phase 1 Tactic C. Fill the calendar, displace the connections. Isolation by substitution. Phase 2 Financial dependency. Duration 3 months. Objective, shift financial control from Brooke to Patrick, the Constance access. Tactics A. Encourage Brooke to add Patrick as primary account holder on all financial accounts. Frame is simplification and partnership. B. Redirect Brooke's automatic savings contributions to a joint investment account managed by a new advisor, Constance, to select. C. Gradually increase household expenses attributed to Brooke's preferences, home renovation, Lily's activities to reduce her personal savings. D. If Brooke resists, Patrick to express hurt. Don't you trust me? I thought we were a team. Phase 2 was in progress. The conversation Patrick had started 2 weeks ago about simplifying our finances. The suggestion that we consolidate accounts, that having separate savings was unnecessary for a married couple, that he should be added to my personal accounts for convenience. That conversation was not a conversation, it was phase 2, tactic A. And his response when I'd hesitated, the wounded, betrayed expression, the quiet, I thought we were partners, Brooke, was phase 2, tactic D, the scripted emotional response to a predicted resistance. Phase 3, social alienation. Duration, 2 months. Objective, establish narrative that Brooke is difficult, controlling, and unstable. Tactics, a Patrick to confide in selected friends and family that Brooke has been erratic and anxious since reducing her work hours. B. Constance to express concern about Brooke's mental health to key family members. Plant the groundwork for a narrative that can be activated later if needed. C. Document any emotional reactions from Brooke. Arguments, tears, frustration as evidence of instability. Phase 3, the phase that was going well. According to the message I'd first seen, she's isolated from Janet. Now the isolation was working. The narrative was being built. Somewhere in conversations I wasn't part of, in rooms I wasn't in, the story of Brooke Aldridge was being rewritten. Not as a competent accountant, a loving mother, a woman who built her own floor, but as a woman who was erratic, anxious, unstable, difficult. The vocabulary of dismissal applied with the precision of a woman who understood that the most effective weapon against a competent person is not confrontation, but redefine. Phase 4, financial restructuring. Duration 3 months. Objective, complete transfer of financial control. Tactics A. Patrick to assume management of all household finances. Frame as helping Brooke with her stress. B. Redirect Brooke's remaining income to joint accounts controlled by Patrick. C. Constance to provide Patrick with funds for a separate account not visible to Brooke. Emergency fund for legal expenses if divorce becomes necessary. D. Engage family law attorney. Constance to select for preliminary consultation. Rec. Custody strategy. Custody strategy. The words hit me with the force of a physical collision. Custody of Lily, my daughter. The 3-year-old drawing purple horses 10 feet behind me while I read a document that described in 14 steps how her mother would be systematically stripped of the resources, relationships, and credibility needed to keep her. Phases 5 through 7 described the endgame. Gradual separation initiated by Patrick on grounds of irreconcilable differences and supported by the narrative of Brooke's instability. Custody filing prioritizing Aldridge family resources and stable home environment. Constance's house, the 4-bedroom colonial, offered as the child's primary residence during proceedings and financial settlement, minimized by the prior transfer of assets away from Brooke's control. The final phase, phase 7, labeled resolution, contained one sentence. Lily grows up Aldridge. Lily grows up Aldridge. 4 words, the objective, the purpose, the reason for the 14 steps and the 5 months of messages and the fabricated arguments and the reduced work hours and the narrative of instability. Not to destroy me. Destruction was a means, not an end. The end was Lily. The end was ensuring that Constance's granddaughter was raised inside Constance's system, shaped by Constance's values, maintained by Constance's resources, and separated from the woman who would raise her differently. I set the iPad down, turned off the stove, wiped the counter where the pasta water had overflowed, performed for 60 seconds the mechanical actions of a woman in a kitchen, because the mechanical actions were the only things my body knew how to do while my mind processed the information that the life I was living was a controlled demolition, and the detonator was being held by my husband and his mother, and the countdown had been running for 5 months, and I had not known. Lily looked up from her drawing. Mama, the water was angry. I know, sweetheart. It's okay now. Is the pasta ready? Not yet. Mama needs a minute. I took the iPad to the bathroom, locked the door, and for 20 minutes, the most focused, disciplined, important 20 minutes of my life, I documented everything. I photographed every message, every phase, every tactic, every timestamp. I scrolled through 5 months of conversation between my husband and his mother and captured it all. The strategy sessions, the progress reports, the adjustments. She's pushing back on the account consolidation. Patrick, remember, wounded, not angry. Express hurt, not pressure. The moments of satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. Janet hasn't called in 3 weeks. Well done. And the clinical devastating efficiency of two people dismantling a woman's life the way an engineer dismantles a structure. Load by load, beam by beam, according to plan. I sent the photographs to my personal email, to my mother's email, to a new cloud account I created in the bathroom in 4 minutes. Redundancy backup. The accountant's instinct. Never have only one copy of critical documents. Then I washed my face, went back to the kitchen, made the pasta, not carbonara, just butter and parmesan, Lily's favorite, set the table, called Patrick, who was at a client dinner. The chat log showed no mention of a client dinner. Phase 3 included maintain social schedule that reduces time at home, reducing Brooke's opportunity to observe inconsistencies. Told him dinner was ready whenever he got home. Kept my voice steady. Kept my hand steady. Performed the role of a woman who doesn't know, because the plan depended on my not knowing. And the plan's greatest vulnerability was that I now did. Patrick came home at 9. I was in bed, lights off, performing sleep. He checked on Lily, a gesture I used to find tender and that now registered as surveillance verifying the location of the asset. He got into bed. He fell asleep. I did not sleep. At 6 the next morning, I called my mother. She picked up on the first ring. Mom, I need help. I'm here. Are you sitting down? I'm always sitting down at 6 in the morning. I'm 61 in Brooke. What's wrong? I told her everything. The iPad, the plan, the 14 phases, the fabricated argument about her parenting comment, the reduced work hours, the account consolidation, the custody strategy, the 4 words, Lily grows up Aldridge. My mother was silent for a long time. Not the silence of shock. Janet Brennan did not do shock. The silence of a woman receiving confirmation of something she suspected. The silence of a mother who said, watch her 6 years ago, and has been watching from a distance ever since. Unable to intervene, unwilling to be the mother-in-law who interferes, waiting for the evidence to become undeniable. You have the screenshots, everything, 5 months, every message. Send them to me now. Then call Beth Russo. Who's Beth Russo? The best family law attorney in Richmond. I've had her number for 2 years. 2 years. Brooke, I've been watching. I told you to watch. You didn't listen. So, I watched for both of us. I've had Beth's number since the Sunday I visited. And Constance spent the entire lunch talking about Patrick and Lily as though you weren't in the room. I called Beth the next day and said, my daughter might need you someday. Beth said, I'll be here. My mother, Janet Brennan, the woman I'd been isolated from, the woman whose calls I'd stopped returning because my husband told me she'd criticized my parenting. The woman who, while I was being systematically dismantled, had been standing outside the building with a rescue plan of her own. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't listen. Listen now. Call Beth today before Patrick wakes up. I called Beth Russo at 7:15. She answered with the alert, unsurprised voice of an attorney who has heard some version of this story before and treats each iteration with the same professional gravity. Your mother told me you might call. Tell me everything. I told her. She listened without interrupting, a skill that attorneys share with accountants and therapists. The skill of receiving information without contaminating it with reaction. The screenshots are critical, she said when I finished. They establish premeditation, conspiracy, and a coordinated effort to deprive you of marital assets and custody through deception. The fabricated argument with your mother is particularly important. It demonstrates a pattern of deliberate alienation. And the custody language, Lily grows up Aldridge. That's the kind of statement that judges remember. What do I do? You do nothing visible. You continue the performance, the marriage, the routine, the role they've assigned you. You do this because the moment Patrick and Constance know that you know, they'll accelerate the plan. They'll move assets. They'll activate the narrative. They'll consult their attorney, the one Constance was going to select. You need to move first. And you need to move from a position of strength. And strength means preparation. Beth's preparation took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of the most disciplined acting I've ever done. 6 weeks of cooking dinner and discussing finances and attending Sunday lunches at Constance's Colonial and nodding at suggestions and performing the role of a woman who was unaware compliant, transitioning smoothly through the phases of her own demolition. 6 weeks of smiling at Constance across the dinner table while knowing that the woman passing me the salt was simultaneously managing a campaign to take my daughter. 6 weeks of sleeping beside Patrick while knowing that the man whose breathing I could hear in the dark was not my partner but my opponent. During those 6 weeks, I did the following. I contacted my firm and requested a return to full-time hours. My supervisor, a woman named Diana, who had been puzzled by my reduction in the first place, approved immediately. My income was restored. My professional network was reactivated. Phase 1 tactic B reversed. I called my mother every day, sometimes twice. I told her about the fabricated parenting comment. She said, "I never said that, Brooke. I never would. I knew I'd known somewhere beneath the insecurity that the plan had exploited that my mother would never criticize my parenting. The plan had used the space between knowing and trusting, the gap where insecurity lives, and I had let it. Phase 1 tactic A reversed. I called Maya. I called my book club. I called every friend I'd been too busy to see for 3 months and said, "I'm sorry, I'm back." Phase 1 tactic C reversed. I opened a personal bank account at a credit union. Not the one Patrick and I used, not one connected to any Aldridge resource. I redirected my automatic savings contributions to this account. I moved $40,000 of personal savings, money I'd earned before the marriage, money that was legally mine, into the new account. Phase 2 neutralized. Beth prepared the filing, divorce petition, emergency custody motion, and the element that would define everything that followed. A request for a temporary restraining order based on the documented pattern of emotional manipulation, financial coercion, and conspiracy to deprive me of parental rights. The screenshots were attached as exhibits. All 14 phases, all 5 months of messages, the 4 words, Lily grows up Aldridge. On the morning of the 7th week, I dropped Lily at daycare, drove to the courthouse, and filed. Patrick was served at work at 11:09 a.m. Constance was served at her home at 11:15. The coordination was deliberate. Beth wanted them to receive the news simultaneously, preventing either from warning the other and initiating the acceleration she'd predicted. Patrick called me at 11:07. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. He called a third time, and I answered, not because I was ready to talk, but because Beth had advised me to have one documented conversation in which Patrick's reaction was captured. "Brooke, what is this? It's a divorce petition and an emergency custody, Brooke. You can't. What is happening? Phase 4 Patrick, financial restructuring. Remember your mother's plan? The one on your iPad. The one that describes in 14 steps how to separate me from my home, my savings, my daughter, and my life. That plan. I found it. I read it. I photographed it, and now it's Exhibit A in a custody filing that your mother is receiving at her front door right now." Silence. The silence of a system crash. Total absolute. The absence of all output from a processor that has received input it was never designed to handle. You read the messages, everyone. 5 months. Every phase, every tactic, every progress report. Phase 1 complete. Janet hasn't called in 3 weeks. Well done. She's pushing back on account consolidation. Remember, wounded, not angry. Lily grows up, Aldridge. I read it all, Patrick. And I've been reading it for 6 weeks while you slept beside me. And your mother passed me the salt on Sundays. And both of you believed because the plan told you to believe that I was isolated, dependent, unstable, and controllable. I am none of those things. I was never any of those things. You just needed me to be because the plan required it. Brooke, let me explain. There is no explanation. There is a document. The document describes a conspiracy between a husband and his mother to strip a wife of her financial independence, her social support, her parental credibility, and her child. The document uses words like phase and tactic and success metric. It is not a misunderstanding. It is not mom being mom. It is a plan, and I have it, and so does my attorney, and so does the court. Mom was just trying to help. Your mother was trying to take my daughter. That's not help. That's warfare. And she conducted it with the precision and patience of a woman who has been planning other people's lives for 30 years and has never been told no. I'm telling her no. I'm telling you no. And I'm doing it with the same thoroughness she used to plan my destruction. Because I learned something from Constance Aldridge. Patrick, I learned that the most effective response to a plan is a better plan. Patrick didn't respond. The line was open. I could hear his breathing, the office background noise, the distant sound of a workplace continuing its business while a man sat at his desk and watched the architecture of his mother's strategy collapse around him. "I'll be at the house tonight to pick up Lily's things," I said. "The rest will be handled by my attorney." Her name is Beth Russo. Your mother might want to write that down. The hearing was 3 weeks later. Beth had requested an expedited schedule based on the documented manipulation. And the judge, a woman named Patricia Holden, who had been on the family court bench for 18 years, and who had, according to Beth, a very specific reaction to parents who treat custody as a chess game, granted it. The courtroom was small. Patrick sat on one side with his attorney, a man's Constance had selected as planned from a firm that specialized in high asset divorces and that charged accordingly. Constance sat behind Patrick in the gallery, wearing a navy blazer and an expression of composed, unreadable calm. I sat on the other side with Beth, and behind me sat my mother, Janet Brennan, in the same dress she'd worn to my wedding. Because Janet didn't buy clothes for occasions, and the dress still fit. And the symmetry of wearing it to both the beginning and the end of my marriage was something she would later describe as efficient. Beth presented the evidence. The screenshots were projected, enlarged, time-stamped, undeniable. The judge read them. The courtroom read them. Patrick's attorney read them with the specific expression of a lawyer discovering in real time that his client's case is not what he was told it was. Phase 1, isolation from external support, the fabricated argument with Janet, the reduced work hours, the displaced friendships. Phase 2, financial dependency, the account consolidation, the managed advisor, the scripted emotional manipulation, wounded, not angry. Phase 3, social alienation, the narrative of instability, the documentation of emotional reactions, the clinical systematic construction of a story designed to make a competent woman look incompetent. Phase 4, financial restructuring, the hidden accounts, the emergency legal fund, the custody strategy, and the final phase. The 4 words that Beth read aloud slowly with the deliberate emphasis that the words deserved. Lily grows up Aldridge. Judge Holden looked at the screen, looked at Patrick, looked at Constance in the gallery, and said in the measured judicial tone that is more devastating than any raised voice. In 18 years on this bench, I have seen many things. I have never seen a plan, a literal, written, phased plan to deprive a mother of her child. The court finds this deeply troubling. The ruling was comprehensive, temporary full custody to me, supervised visitation for Patrick. Not because he was violent, not because he was dangerous, but because the court found that his participation in a coordinated campaign to alienate a child from her mother constituted a pattern of behavior that required oversight. Constance was named in the order, explicitly by name, as a party whose influence on custody arrangements was to be monitored by the court. A forensic accountant was appointed to trace all financial transactions involving Aldridge family accounts for the previous 12 months. Constance sat in the gallery and listened to the ruling with the same composed, unreadable calm she'd worn throughout the hearing. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. She sat perfectly still, the way a building sits perfectly still in the moment after the foundation has been removed and before gravity notices. Patrick cried in the courtroom, in front of the judge, in front of his attorney, in front of his mother. He cried with the bewildered, uncomprehending grief of a man who has followed instructions his entire life and has just discovered that the instructions were wrong. I did not cry. I sat beside Beth Russo and held my mother's hand behind me and felt Lily's weight in my arms, even though Lily was at daycare and wouldn't know any of this for years. And I thought, you are safe. You are mine. And nobody, no plan, no phase, no strategy is going to take you from me. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. I received primary custody. Patrick received supervised visitation, transitioning to unsupervised after 6 months of compliance and a parenting course that the judge mandated. The financial settlement was equitable. Beth's forensic accountant had traced the hidden accounts Constance had funded, and the discovery added a layer of complexity that Patrick's attorney resolved by recommending his client cooperate fully, which Patrick, exhausted and defeated and separated for the first time in his life from his mother's direction, did. Constance did not cooperate. Constance hired her own attorney, separate from Patrick's, and contested the custody arrangement and the restraining provisions and the forensic accounting and every other element of the ruling that constrained her access to her granddaughter. The contest failed. The evidence was too comprehensive, the plan too documented, the 4 words too indelible. Lily grows up Aldridge followed Constance through every filing and every hearing and every judicial review, a sentence that she had written as an objective and that had become instead an epitaph for her authority. I live in Richmond in an apartment, temporary small mine. Lily has her own room decorated with drawings of purple horses that eat stars because Lily is 4 now, and her imagination has only grown larger and more specific and more beautiful. My mother visits every weekend. She brings groceries and doesn't ask questions and sits on the couch and reads to Lily and looks at me sometimes with the expression of a woman who said, "Watch her 6 years ago," and who has been waiting patiently and painfully for her daughter to finally listen. I listened late imperfectly after 5 months of being dismantled and 6 weeks of pretending not to know. But I listened and the listening saved me. Not the screenshots, not the attorney, not the filing, the listening. The decision to hear what the evidence was saying instead of what I wanted it to say. The decision to trust the pattern instead of the performance. The decision to be the accountant my mother raised me to be. A woman who reads the documents, follows the numbers, and doesn't let anyone. Not a husband, not a mother-in-law, not a 14-phase plan. Tell her that the numbers are wrong. Patrick and I don't speak except through attorneys. This will change. Beth says co-parenting requires communication, and communication requires time, and time requires the specific, painful, incremental process of rebuilding trust between two people who have none. I'm not ready for that yet. I'm ready for Lily's drawings and my mother's weekends in the apartment that is small and temporary and mine. Constance, I don't see at all. The court order restricts her involvement in custody matters, and Patrick's supervised visitation takes place at a neutral location that Constance is not permitted to attend. She exists somewhere in Henrio County in the 4-bedroom colonial, with the real silver and the catered meals, and the garden that Gerald always said a house without was a house without a soul. She exists and she plans. I have no doubt that Constance is still planning because planning is what Constance does, the way breathing is what lungs do. But her plans no longer have jurisdiction over my life. Her phases don't apply to my timeline. Her transitions don't include my name. I am Brooke Brennan, not Aldridge Brennan. I reclaimed the name the day the divorce was final, and I use it now the way my mother uses it, as a foundation, a floor I built myself, a surface I stand on that belongs to no one else, and that cannot be restructured, consolidated, or transferred to a joint account managed by someone who reports to someone who plans. Lily draws horses, purple ones, wild ones, horses that live in the clouds and eat stars and run without saddles. She draws them at the kitchen table in an apartment where the iPad is mine and the passwords are mine and the door is locked with a lock I control. And every night after the drawings are done and the pasta is eaten and Lily is in bed and the apartment is quiet, I sit at the table and I read. Not messages, not plans, not the 14 phases of a document designed to dismantle me. I read the books I didn't have time for when I was being managed. I read the novels Maya recommended. I read the chapters of a life that is being written, not by Constance, not by Patrick, not by anyone with a strategy and a timeline and a transition plan. By me, one page at a time. In my own handwriting, in my own name, Brennan, the name my mother gave me, the name I gave back to myself. The only plan I follow